The cold on Kethra Station didn't just bite. It burrowed into your bones and made a home there, settling in like a permanent guest you never invited. Jaron Moss had stopped feeling it years ago. Or maybe he'd just learned to ignore the way his fingers went numb inside his gloves, the way his breath formed crystals on his beard within seconds of stepping outside. He wasn't supposed to be at the auction. He'd told himself that 3 times while walking past the converted cargo bay, then twice more while standing just outside the entrance. But his feet kept moving forward anyway, drawn by something he couldn't name. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the guilt that still woke him at night, reminding him of the people he hadn't saved back on Terra Nova. Maybe it was just the human tendency to look at broken things and wonder if they could be fixed. The auction hall stank of desperation and disinfectant. Cages lined the walls, each containing a being from some corner of the galaxy. Jaron watched from the back as the crowd of miners, ship captains, and station officials placed their bids. One by one, the cages emptied. A Veshan mechanic went for 8,000 credits. A Gorvan laborer for 12. The auctioneer's voice droned on, mechanical and bored, as if he were selling equipment rather than lives. Jaron's stomach turned, but he stayed. He wasn't sure why. Then he saw her, the last cage. The one everyone had walked past without a second glance. Inside sat a woman, if you could call her that. Her skin held the color of frozen moonlight, silver blue and luminous even in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Dark violet hair fell past her shoulders in tangled waves, partially obscuring her face. She wore nothing but a thin gray shift, torn at the shoulder. Her hands lay motionless in her lap. What struck Jaron most was her absolute stillness. She didn't shiver despite the cold, didn't look up at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the auctioneer when he gestured dismissively in her direction. Last item, the auctioneer announced without enthusiasm. Solani, species Velith, age estimated 27 standard years. No skills documented, non-responsive. Opening bid, 500 credits. Silence filled the hall. Someone in the front row laughed. The sound echoed off the metal walls like mockery given physical form. Anyone. The auctioneer waited exactly 5 seconds. No? Right then. Unit will be processed for organ reclamation at 0600. Auction concluded. The crowd began to disperse. Jaron found himself moving forward, pushing through the mass of bodies. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was stupid. He barely had enough credits for fuel to get off this frozen rock. He didn't need another mouth to feed, another problem to solve. But his hand was already reaching for his credit chip. "Wait," he called out. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, rough from disuse. "I'll take her." The auctioneer turned, one eyebrow raised. "You sure about that, friend? Thing hasn't moved or spoken in 3 weeks. Might be brain dead, I'm sure." Jaron stepped up to the terminal and pressed his chip against the scanner. The machine beeped. 500 credits drained from his account, leaving him with barely enough for a month's rations. "Your funeral," the auctioneer muttered, tossing him a key card. "Cage 47. She's all yours." Jaron approached the cage slowly. Up close he could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, the almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers. Not dead, not even close. Just buried so deep inside herself that the world couldn't reach her anymore. He understood that feeling better than he cared to admit. The lock clicked. Open. He knelt beside her, moving with careful deliberation. "Hey," he said softly. "I'm Jaron. I'm going to get you out of here, okay?" No response. Her eyes remained closed, dark lashes resting against silver blue cheeks. Jaron shrugged off his thermal coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. She weighed almost nothing when he lifted her into his arms, all sharp angles and fragile bones. Her head lolled against his chest, and he felt the whisper of her breath against his neck. Outside, the storm had intensified. Snow whipped sideways across the platform, stinging his exposed skin. The station's lights flickered overhead, struggling against the perpetual darkness of Kethras's polar night. Jarin tucked her closer against him and started the long walk to his shelter. His quarters were on the far edge of the station. A converted storage unit he'd modified with black market heating coils and reinforced insulation. It wasn't much, but it was warm and private. He shouldered open the door and carried her inside, laying her carefully on his bunk. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching her breathe. The coat had slipped from one shoulder, revealing a network of scars across her collarbone. Not random, deliberate, patterned that something had been done to her. Something terrible. Jarin pulled a thermal blanket from the storage locker and draped it over her. He activated the room's heater, turning it up higher than he usually allowed himself. Then he collapsed into the single chair by the wall and dropped his head into his hands. What had he just done? A sound made him look up. Soft, barely audible. Her lips had parted, and a single word emerged, cracked and broken. Why? Jarin leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Because everyone else walked away, he said simply. And I'm tired of walking away. Her eyes opened then. Not all the way, just slits of crystalline violet gazing at him through dark lashes. She studied him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, as if she could see straight through to all the broken pieces he tried to keep hidden. Then her eyes closed again, and she slept. Jarin sat watching her until dawn, if you could call it that on a world where the sun never truly rose. And for the first time in 3 years, the cold didn't feel quite so suffocating. Silani didn't speak again for 2 days. Jarin didn't push. He'd seen enough trauma in his life to recognize when someone needed space to remember how to be human, or whatever equivalent her species had. Instead, he fell into a routine around her silence. He made simple meals, broths and soft grain that wouldn't tax a system weakened by starvation. He left them within reach and stepped away, giving her the choice. Sometimes she ate. Sometimes the food sat untouched until it grew cold. He never commented on either outcome. On the third morning, he woke to find her sitting upright on the bunk, the thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. She was staring at her hands, turning them over slowly as if seeing them for the first time. "Morning," Jarin said, keeping his voice low and even. He moved to the small heating unit that served as his kitchen. "Tea?" She didn't answer, but her head tilted slightly toward him. He took that as permission and prepared 2 cups, adding a touch of honey to hers. When he brought it to her, she accepted it with both hands, cradling the warmth against her chest. They sat in comfortable silence, him in his chair, her on the bunk. Outside, the station's morning shift change created a distant rumble of footsteps and machinery. Inside, there was only the hum of the heater and the quiet sound of breathing. "I was a singer," she said suddenly. Her voice was rough, unpracticed, but there was a musical quality beneath the damage. "Before?" Jarin looked up. "Yeah?" "The Temple of Velis Minor. I was chosen when I was 6. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "We sang the old songs, the ones that held memory. Every note was sacred. Every breath was prayer." "Sounds beautiful," Jarin said. It was. Her eyes focused on something far away, some moment lost in the past. Until the raid. They came at night, when we were singing the evening devotional. They had nets that shocked you unconscious. When I woke, I was in a cargo hold with 40 others. Jarin's jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet, letting her speak at her own pace. The trader who bought us didn't want singers. He wanted silence. So he brought in a neural specialist. Her hand moved to the back of her neck, fingers tracing something Jarin couldn't see. They implanted a dampener. cut the connection between my mind and my voice. I can speak, but I cannot sing, cannot access the part of myself that made the music. That's why you were left behind, Jaren said quietly. At the auction. She nodded. A singer who cannot sing, a voice without sound, worthless. No, the word came out harder than he intended. Jaren stood and crossed to the bunk, kneeling so they were eye level. Not worthless. Never worthless. Her violet eyes met his, shimmering with unshed tears. Then what am I? Someone who survived, he said. Someone who's still here, still fighting. That's worth more than any song. A tear slipped down her cheek, tracing a path through the silver blue skin. Without thinking, Jaren reached up and brushed it away with his thumb. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her eyes closing. I don't remember the last time someone touched me without causing pain, she whispered. Jaren's heart cracked. He understood that too. May I? He asked, gesturing to the bunk beside her. She shifted over, making space. He sat, maintaining a careful distance. They stayed like that, side by side, until her breathing steadied. The scars, she said after a while. On my back. They're from the dampener installation. The device has neural filaments that burrow into the spine. Can it be removed? Theoretically. But the procedure is delicate. One wrong move and I'd be paralyzed. Most surgeons won't risk it. She paused. And even if they would, I couldn't afford it. Jaren nodded slowly, mind already working through possibilities. Kethra Station had a black market medical bay. Expensive, dangerous, but equipped for exactly these kinds of procedures. He had nothing left to trade except his ship, but maybe he could work out a deal. Labor, smuggling runs something. Let me see, he said gently. Solani hesitated, then slowly turned her back to him. She pulled her hair over one shoulder and lowered the blanket. The sight made Jaren's breath catch. Her back was a canvas of pain. Fine silver scars radiated out from her spine in geometric patterns, following the paths of nerves. At the base of her neck, he could see the faint outline of the device itself, a small raised square beneath the skin. God, he breathed. Hideous, isn't it? No. He reached out, fingers hovering just above the scarred skin. May I touch? She nodded, barely perceptible. Jaren placed his palm flat against her upper back, feeling the warmth of her skin, the slight tremor that ran through her at the contact. Slowly, carefully, he traced one of the scars with his fingertip, following its path from spine to shoulder blade. Every scar tells a story, he said softly. Yours tell me you're a survivor, that you endured something horrific and came through it. There's no shame in that. Her shoulders began to shake. At first, he thought she was crying, but then he realized she was laughing. A broken, desperate sound that held both grief and relief. You're an unusual human, Jaren Moss, so I've been told. She turned to face him, letting the blanket fall away entirely. The thin shift she wore left little to imagination, but this wasn't about desire. It was about trust. About allowing herself to be seen, completely and without shame. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. Be close to someone without fear. Neither do I, Jaren said honestly. But maybe we can figure it out together. Solani reached up and placed her hand against his cheek. Her palm was cool and soft, her touch tentative. You saved me. You're saving yourself. I'm just here. That's enough. They stayed like that for a long time, her hand on his face, his hand on her back. Outside, the station rumbled with life. Inside, something new and fragile began to grow in the space between the broken pieces. When they finally lay down to sleep, it was together. Not out of passion but need, the human requirement for warmth and connection. Jaren wrapped his arms around her, careful of her scars, and she pressed her back against his chest, fitting perfectly into the curve of his body. "Jaren?" She murmured, half asleep. "Yeah?" "Thank you for looking when everyone else turned away." He tightened his hold, breathing in the faint scent of her hair. "Thank you for letting me." And in the darkness of his small shelter, with the weight of her trust in his arms, Jaren Moss felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The days began to blur together in the best way possible. Jaren found himself measuring time not by station shifts or cycles, but by the small moments of connection with Solani. The way she smiled when he brought her tea. The sound of her humming, wordless and broken, while she organized his cluttered quarters. The warmth of her presence filling spaces he hadn't realized were empty. She was stronger now. The hollows in her cheeks had filled out. Color had returned to her silver-blue skin, making it shimmer in the dim light. She moved with more confidence, exploring his small shelter like it was a palace. One evening, Jaren returned from a salvage run to find her sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by pieces of broken equipment he'd been meaning to sort. Her fingers moved over the components with surprising dexterity, sorting them into piles by some logic he couldn't immediately discern. "What are you doing?" he asked, setting down his toolkit. She looked up, and he was struck again by the depth of violet in her eyes. "Your organization system is chaos." "I'm fixing it. I have a system." "No, you have optimistic piles." She held up a corroded power cell. "This belongs with energy storage, not with navigational components." Jaren laughed, to sound rusty but genuine. "Fair enough. Carry on." He started to move past her, but she caught his wrist. Her touch was light, questioning. "Sit with me?" He did, folding himself onto the floor beside her. They worked in comfortable silence, her sorting, him cataloging. Their shoulders brushed occasionally, each contact sending a small spark of awareness through him. "In my culture," Solani said after a while, "there is a language older than speech. We call it keva, the touching of souls. When the neural dampener was installed, I lost my ability to sing, but I still remember keva." "What is it exactly?" She set down the component she'd been holding and turned to face him fully. "May I show you?" "Of course." Solani reached for his hand, cradling it gently between both of hers. She closed her eyes and her fingers began to move. Not randomly, but with purpose. A tap against his palm, a stroke along his thumb, a gentle pressure on his wrist. Each touch distinct, deliberate. "That," she said softly, "means gratitude." Her fingers moved again, tracing a different pattern. 3 light taps followed by a circular motion. Respect. Again, this time slower. A long stroke from palm to fingertips, repeated twice. Trust. Jaren watched, fascinated. "It's beautiful. It's ancient. From before my people developed a vocal language. When we lived in the deep caves of Velis and sound traveled poorly." She met his eyes. "It's intimate. We only share keva with those we consider family or ... closer." The air between them shifted, charged with unspoken possibility. Jaren turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. "Will you teach me?" Her smile was radiant. Yes. They spent the next hour on the floor, her patient hands guiding his clumsy ones through the basic vocabulary. He learned the touches for yes and no, for hunger and comfort, for question and answer. His fingers were calloused and rough compared to her smooth skin. But she never flinched, never pulled away. "You're a quick study," she said. A note of approval in her voice. "I'm motivated." He demonstrated the pattern she'd taught him for appreciation. "How was that?" "Perfect." She paused, then took both his hands in hers. "There's one more I want to teach you. But it's significant, okay?" Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Permission, maybe. Or courage. Then she guided his right hand to her left wrist, placing his fingers over her pulse point. She covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm flat. "Feel my heartbeat," she instructed. He could. A steady rhythm against his fingertips, quick and fluttering like a trapped bird. Solani moved his other hand to her chest, just above her heart. The intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on him, but this felt sacred rather than sexual. She held his hand there, letting him feel the life thrumming beneath her skin. "Now," she said quietly, "I'll do the same." She placed her hands on him, one on his wrist, one over his heart. Her touch was cool and gentle. They stayed like that, eyes locked, feeling the rhythm of each other's existence. "This," she whispered, "is how we say I see you. All of you. And I choose to remain." Jaren's throat tightened. "Solani." "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." But he did. God help him, he did. He shifted their positions carefully, maintaining the hand contact until they were facing each other fully. Then he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture he'd once seen her people use in a documentary. "I see you too," he murmured, "and I'm not going anywhere." Her breath caught. Then she was moving, closing the tiny distance between them, and her lips found his. The kiss was tentative at first, testing, exploring. She tasted like the honey tea he'd made her, sweet and warm. Jaren responded carefully, one hand moving to cup her face while the other remained over her heart, feeling it race. The kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more necessary. 3 years of loneliness poured into it, met by whatever depths of isolation she'd endured. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Solani rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what?" "That this is temporary. That I'll wake up and you'll realize I'm too broken to fix." Jaren tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. "I'm not trying to fix you. And you're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. And when I'm healed? What then? Then you decide what you want. Stay or go, I'll support either choice." He brushed a strand of violet hair behind her ear. "But for what it's worth, I hope you stay." She kissed him again, softer this time, filled with promise rather than desperation. "The dampener," she said when they parted. "If there's a way to remove it, I want to try. It's dangerous. I know. But I need my voice back, Jaren. I need to be whole again." He understood that desire better than she knew. "Then we'll find a way." They moved to the bunk together, not to sleep, but to simply be close. Solani curled into him, her head on his chest, his arms wrapped around her. He could feel the device beneath her skin, that small square of violation, and he silently swore he'd find a way to remove it. "Sing for me," she murmured. "Even if I can't, you can. I'm not much of a singer." "I don't care. I just want to hear what joy sounds like." So Jaren sang, voice rough and untrained, an old earth ballad his mother had taught him. The words were about ships and stars and coming home. Solani's fingers traced patterns on his chest in time with the melody, Keva touches he didn't yet understand but felt nonetheless. When the song ended, she was crying silently. That was beautiful. It was terrible. No, she looked up at him, eyes shimmering. It was hope. And I haven't heard that sound in a very long time. They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, two broken souls finding unexpected wholeness in the space between their scars. Outside, Kethra Station continued its endless rotation through the dark. But inside, in Jaren's small shelter, something bright and impossible had taken root. And for the first time in years, neither of them felt alone. The heist for her voice, the Black Market Medical Bay, operated out of Sublevel 9, a section of Kethra Station that officially didn't exist on any map. Jaren had been down there twice before, Once to get his leg set after a salvage accident, once to trade information for credits. Both times he'd sworn he'd never return. Now he was planning to break in. "This is insane," he muttered, studying the hand-drawn schematic spread across his workbench. Selani stood beside him, her presence a warm pressure against his arm. "You don't have to do this," she said. But her hand found his, fingers already forming the Keva pattern for hope. "Yes, I do." He pointed to a vent shaft on the map. "The neural restoration device they have is military grade, stolen from a Terran medical frigate. It's the only one on this station capable of safely removing your dampener. And if we're caught, then we run, fast." She was quiet for a moment, then traced a new pattern on his palm. Determination mixed with fear. "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. It's my voice. My risk to take." Her violet eyes flashed with sudden steel. "I've spent weeks being helpless, Jarin. Don't make me be helpless now." He wanted to argue, to lock her safely in his quarters until it was done. But he recognized that look. He'd worn it himself often enough. "Fine, but you follow my lead exactly. No improvising. I'm Valeth. We don't improvise. We calculate." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Jarin traded his spare parts for basic infiltration gear, magnetic gloves, a portable scanner, a handheld plasma cutter. Selani proved unexpectedly useful, her musician's hands adapting quickly to the delicate work of circuit manipulation. "Where did you learn that?" Jarin asked, watching her bypass a practice lock in under 30 seconds. "Temple security systems." She smiled faintly. "Someone had to know how they worked in case of emergency. I volunteered. Remind me never to underestimate you. I will." The night of the heist arrived with artificial stillness. Cathrus's environmental systems had dimmed the lights for sleep cycle, casting the corridors in deep shadow. Jarin and Selani moved through the station like ghosts, avoiding patrol patterns he'd spent weeks memorizing. Sublevel 9 smelled like recycled air and desperation. The medical bay sat behind a reinforced door, guarded by a single automated turret. Jarin pulled out the scanner and ran it over the locking mechanism. "Security's been upgraded," he whispered. 3-layer encryption. Selani examined it, head tilted. Then her fingers flew across the keypad in a pattern too quick to follow. The lock clicked open. "How? Musical sequence," she explained. "The tones correspond to common security codes. Basic infiltration technique where I'm from. You're full of surprises. You have no idea." They slipped inside. The medical bay was larger than Jarin had expected, a maze of examination rooms and equipment lockers. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly green. His heart hammered against his ribs as they moved deeper. "There," Selani pointed. Through a glass window, they could see the device. A sleek chrome unit roughly the size of a briefcase, covered in medical certifications. The room was locked. Jarin pulled out the plasma cutter. "This is going to make noise. Once I start, we have maybe 3 minutes before security responds. Then we'd better be fast." The cutter ignited with a soft hiss. He traced a careful line around the lock mechanism, metal glowing orange, then white. Sweat dripped into his eyes despite the cold. Beside him, Selani kept watch, her body tense as a drawn bow. The lock gave way with a metallic clang that sounded impossibly loud. Jarin shoved the door open and rushed inside. The device sat on a mobile cart connected to diagnostic equipment. He started disconnecting cables, fingers clumsy with adrenaline. "Jarin." Selani's voice was tight with warning. "Company." He looked up. Through the window, he could see security personnel entering the bay, weapons drawn. 3 of them, moving in practiced formation. Damn it. He ripped the last cable free and grabbed the device. Time to run. They bolted for the back exit. Alarms shrieked to life, red lights strobing. Jaren's lungs burned as they sprinted down corridors. The device clutched against his chest. Behind them, shouts and footsteps echoed. Left. Solani gasped. Service tunnel. They skidded around the corner. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for them to move single file. Jaren went first, Solani right behind him. The walls pressed close, claustrophobic and cold. They emerged in an abandoned storage bay 2 levels up. Jaren slammed the access panel closed behind them and activated the emergency seal. It wouldn't hold long, but it didn't have to. Are you hurt? He turned to Solani, checking her over. I'm fine. She was breathing hard, eyes bright with something between fear and exhilaration. We did it. Not yet. We need to get this back to my quarters and perform the procedure before they track us down. They moved quickly but carefully, avoiding main corridors. Jaren's mind raced ahead, running through the procedure he'd memorized from black market medical texts. It was dangerous. One wrong move and he could sever her spinal cord. His hands had to be absolutely steady. Back in his quarters, he sealed the door and set the device on his workbench. Solani was already removing her shirt, bearing her scarred back to him. Are you sure? He asked. Once we start, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything. Jaren activated the device. It hummed to life, holographic displays flickering in the air. He pulled on sterile gloves and prepped the anesthetic injector. This is going to hurt. Everything worth having does. He positioned her carefully, face down on the bunk. His hands trembled as he ran the scanner over her spine, locating the dampener. It was deeper than he'd hoped, tendrils wrapped around nerve clusters. I'm starting, he warned. The extraction took 40 minutes that felt like 40 hours. Solani stayed perfectly still despite the pain, only her fingers gripping the blanket betraying her agony. Jaren worked with surgical precision, using the device's microtools to carefully detach each neural filament. Sweat poured down his face. One wrong move. Just one. Almost there, he breathed. The last filament came free. He extracted the dampener slowly, watching the holographic display for any sign of nerve damage. Nothing. Clean removal. Done, he said, voice shaking. It's out. Solani didn't move for a long moment. Then she drew in a deep, shuddering breath. Her head lifted, hair cascading down her back. When she turned to look at him, tears streamed down her face. She opened her mouth and sang. The sound was pure and crystalline, a note that seemed to resonate in Jaren's bones. It wasn't words, not yet. Just sound. Beautiful, impossible sound that filled his small quarters and made the air vibrate with remembered joy. When the note faded, Solani collapsed into his arms, sobbing. I can sing, she gasped. Jaren, I can sing again. He held her tight, his own tears mixing with hers. You did it. God, you did it. They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, celebrating the reclamation of something precious. Outside, he could hear security forces moving through the corridor, searching. But in this moment, none of that mattered. Solani had her voice back. And Jaren had given her something no one else could, a second chance. The first song the security forces would find them eventually. Jaren knew that with cold certainty as he monitored the station's communication channels on his jury-rigged scanner. They'd already locked down Sublevel 9 and were conducting compartment-by-compartment searches. We have maybe 6 hours, he told Solani, who sat on the edge of the bunk, still touching her throat with wonder. Then they'll reach this section. Where can we go? My ship. It's docked in Bay 17. If we can reach it, we can break atmosphere before they seal the station. She stood, swaying slightly from the residual anesthetic. Jaren caught her elbow, steadying her. Easy. That procedure was traumatic. Your nervous system needs time to, I'm fine. But her voice was shaky, belying the words. She gripped his arm, violet eyes searching his face. Jaren, I need to tell you something before we run. It can wait until we're safe. No. She cupped his face with both hands, the gesture achingly tender. It can't. Because if something happens, if we don't make it, I need you to know. Salani, I love you. The words came out in a rush, raw and unadorned. I know it's fast. I know it's impossible. But somewhere between the auction and this moment, you became my everything. You gave me back myself. And I love you for it. Jaren's world tilted. He'd told himself this was temporary, that once she was healed, she'd want to return to her people, to the temples and the life she'd lost. He'd prepared himself for the inevitable goodbye. He hadn't prepared for this. I love you too, he said, and the truth of it stunned him. I didn't know I could still feel this way. But you make me want to be the person I was before the fire. Before I gave up. She kissed him then, deep and desperate, a promise sealed in touch. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Then let's survive this, she said. Together. They packed light. Jaren grabbed his emergency bag, his toolkit, and the few possessions he couldn't replace. Salani wore his spare thermal jacket, too large for her frame but warm. At the door, he paused, scanning the corridor through the security viewer. Clear. Stay close. They moved through Kethra Station like water finding cracks in stone, avoiding the main arteries, using maintenance passages Jaren had mapped during his years of isolation. Twice they heard security teams passing nearby and froze, barely breathing, until the danger passed. Bay 17 was on the station's outer ring, accessible through a pressurized tunnel that connected to the docking clamps. Jaren's ship, the Wandering Star, was a modified cargo hauler he'd bought with his last credits 3 years ago. She wasn't pretty, but she was fast and her engines were sound. The bay doors loomed ahead. Jaren checked his scanner. Security checkpoint just past the entrance. 2 guards. Can we go around? Not without adding an hour we don't have. He looked at her. There's another option. It's risky. Tell me. You distract them. I'll slip past while they're focused on you.